91. The place of the death of the Apostle James son of Alpheus Ostrakine, Elflusiat, Egypt. James the Less, not to be confused with James the Greater, or son of Zebedee, being the son of Alpheus. There is not much known about the life of James the Less. According to some traditions, James the Less was the first bishop of Syria. He had made missionary travels through Judea, Edessa, Gaza and Eleutheropolis, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Tradition maintains that James the Less was captured under charges of having violated the laws of Moses. He was then crucified at Ostrakine in Lower Egypt, where he was preaching the gospel in 62 AD. Afterwards his body was later sawn to pieces. His remains are located at the Santi Apostoli Church in Rome, Italy. 92. The place of the remains of the Apostle Philip and James the Less, Santi Apostoli Church, Rome, Italy. James the Less was crucified at Ostrakine in Lower Egypt, where he was preaching the gospel in 62 AD. Afterwards his body was later sawn to pieces. The supposed remains of Saint James included fragments of femur and tibia bone. When the bones were dated by carbon-14, they were shown to have belonged to a person who lived between 214 to 340 AD. So these remains could not have belonged to Saint James the son of Alpheus. However, the mummified foot of Saint Philip was not tested and therefore could be a legitimate relic of the disciple. Both the relics of supposed Saint James the Less and Philip are located in a box in the basement of the Church of Santi Apostoli in Rome. What would be interesting to do is to excavate the ruins of Ostrakine to see where the tomb of Saint James is located there. Future excavation would certainly be of value not only to history in general but to the Christian faith in Egypt. 93. The place of the martyrdom of the Apostle Simon Peter, Clementine Chapel, Vatican City. Simon was the son of Jonah and brother of Andrew. He was from the town of Bethsaida, a fishing village near the Sea of Galilee. He married and moved to Capernaum, where he made his living from the fishing trade. He was a disciple who was there with Jesus with James and John at the Transfiguration and who called Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus changed Simon's name to Peter. It was Peter who was the leader of the apostles. Although he denied Jesus at first, he repented, then preached the gospel to many Jews in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. It is also believed that Peter was the source of the Gospel of Mark. He traveled on a missionary journey to Lyra, Joppa and Caesarea. Then he was sent to Samaria by the disciples in Jerusalem. Then Peter was imprisoned in Jerusalem by Herod Agrippa I, 42 to 44 AD, but escaped miraculously by an angel. Then he left Jerusalem in the mid-40s. Strangely, the Apostle Paul, when writing to the Romans in his epistle in 57 AD, although mentioning about 50 believers, he does not mention Saint Peter, the presumed bishop of the church in Rome. According to tradition, he became the bishop of Rome, then was martyred under the Emperor Nero in 62 AD. 94. The burial place of the Apostle Simon Peter, Clementine Chapel, Vatican City. This is the Clementine Chapel in the Vatican, Rome, where Saint Peter was buried after being crucified upside down. However, another possibility for the burial of Saint Peter is that his corpse was taken from Rome and brought to Jerusalem, to the Mount of Olives, Dominus Flevit, and his bones collected in an ossuary. This ossuary was found by Father Dr. Bellarmino Bagatti and bears the inscription Simon son of Jonah and is in Burial Cave 79, where a Chi-Rho symbol was found, the symbol of 1st century Christianity. However, Catholic tradition maintains that he was crucified upside down in what is now the Clementine Chapel and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Italy. An ossuary of Simon son of Jonah in Jerusalem would be very astonishing for Catholics who maintain that the body of Simon Peter has always been buried in Rome, not in Jerusalem. However, The ossuary remains at the Terra Sancta Museum, Church of the Flagellation, Jerusalem. As well, in tomb number 70 they found an ossuary bearing the names Mary and Martha, who were both from Bethany, as mentioned in detail in the Gospels. Their findings were published in 1958 in Gliscavi del Dominus Flevit Parti Uno, along with Father J.T. Milik, an expert in ancient languages and who was central to deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is direct physical evidence from the 1st century of the existence of Simon son of Jonah, Mary and Martha. 95 The place of the martyrdom of the Apostle Paul. San Paolo al Trafontan, Rome, Italy. Saul of Tarsus was a man who was driven by zeal for the law of God. Trained as a Pharisee under Gamaliel, he saw the new Christian faith as something to eradicate and passionately sought to arrest all Christians. While on his way to arrest Christians in Damascus, he was met by Jesus Christ in a vision and was converted into a Christian, the very faith he once tried to destroy. The Lord Jesus called him to be an apostle, just like the 12 apostles, to found churches, to oversee and place leaders in the churches, and to go to places where the gospel was previously unknown. Of the 27 books of the New Testament, St. Paul wrote 13, and possibly 14, of them. After his conversion, he went to Cyprus, Asia Minor, then to Greece, Malta, then to Italy and Rome where he was under house arrest. He possibly then went to Spain to bring the gospel, then was arrested again and put in the Mamertine prison in Rome a second time and condemned to death by the Emperor Nero. It was from here that he wrote the second letter to Timothy. From here Clement, Bishop of Rome, wrote in 95 AD that Paul was beheaded outside Rome at 3rd milestone on the road to Ostia. Legend says that his severed head bounced 3 times and at each spot a spring flowed out. Still today 3 fountains flow within the church. 96 The place of the burial of the Apostle Paul. Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, Rome, Italy. At the time of the execution of St. Paul, Clement, Bishop of Rome, wrote verse weeping friends took his corpse and carried it for burial to the subterranean labyrinths, the catacombs. St. Paul's body was buried in the tomb of a woman named Lucina. The Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome was initially built around the tomb of the Apostle by Emperor Constantine in 324 AD. It was completely rebuilt in 1840. In 2006, as the tomb was excavated, the 2.4 m stone coffin of St. Paul was discovered that dated back to 390 AD. The inscription on the tombstone reads in Latin verse Paulo Apostolo Mart, which means Apostle Paul, Martyr. In 2009, carbon-14 tests on bone fragments contained within the coffin confirmed that they belonged to someone who lived from the 1st to 2nd centuries. This is indeed the bones of St. Paul the Apostle who brought the gospel to the Gentile world. The current Church of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome was built in 1840 around the tomb of the Apostle Paul. 97 The place of the martyrdom and relics of Saint Mark the Evangelist. St. Mark's Cathedral, Alexandria, Egypt. Saint Mark was not part of the 12 disciples but was the author of the second gospel that bears his name. It is said that the gospel account was really Peter's eyewitness account that Mark wrote down for him. Mark, also known as John Mark, traveled with Paul and his cousin Barnabas on their first missionary journey to Cyprus and Asia Minor. Paul didn't want him on their later missionary trips but Barnabas insisted that he stay with the team. So Barnabas and John Mark said goodbye to Paul and went together and Paul went with Silas. Coptic Christians believe that Saint Mark came to Alexandria in the year 49 AD and stayed among the Egyptian people, leading the churches, and was the first bishop of Alexandria until his martyrdom in 68 AD. He is honored as the founder of Christianity in Africa. Pagans in Alexandria were angry that Mark was turning the people away from the gods. They put a noose around his neck and dragged him through the streets of Alexandria until he was dead. His body was buried right on the grounds of St. Mark's Coptic Orthodox Cathedral. 98 The place of the burial of Saint Mark the Evangelist's relics, St. Mark's Basilica, Venice, Italy. Saint Mark was buried in Alexandria, Egypt, in the Church of Saint Mark. However, in the year 828 AD, two Venetian merchants helped by two Greek monks took the bones of Saint Mark as the area was under the control of Islamic Abbasid Caliphate. They smuggled the bones of Saint Mark out and hid them under a layer of pork meat and cabbage leaves. They brought the relics of Saint Mark to Venice and then built the Basilica of Saint Mark to house his relics. It is a fabulously richly decorated church, as the merchants of Venice were renowned for their wealth and was nicknamed the Church of Gold. Now both churches in Alexandria and Venice now have relics of Saint Mark to remember the life of this amazing man of God who was the Bishop of Alexandria and wrote the Gospel of Mark. 99 The place of the martyrdom of the Apostle Andrew, St. Andrew's Cathedral, Patras, Greece. The Apostle Andrew was the brother of Saint Peter and the son of Jonah and was from the town of Bethsaida. In the Gospel of John, Andrew is recorded as being the first disciple to be called and who brought his brother to Jesus. According to Eusebius, after the ascension of Jesus, Andrew preached the gospel in Scythia, what is today southern Russia. As well, the Chronicle of Nestor, 10th century, stated that he preached the gospel along the Black Sea and the Dnieper River as far as Kiev. He became patron saint of Ukraine, Romania, Russia and Scotland. According to tradition, he founded the See of Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul, in 38 AD. According to Hippolytus of Rome, Andrew preached in Thrace. As well, he went to Acre and was finally crucified on an X-shaped cross in the city of Patras in Acre in approximately 69 AD. Although in 1964 the Pope ordered that the relics of Saint Andrew be transferred back to Greece. 100 The place of the burial of the Apostle Andrew, Saint Andrew's Cathedral, Patras, Greece. According to tradition, the Apostle Andrew, brother of Saint Peter, preached the gospel in the areas to the north of the Black Sea and in various parts of Greece. He went up the Dnieper River as far as Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. After years of fruitful ministry for the Lord Jesus, the proconsul of Acre, Egetes, came to Andrew at Patras, Greece. Egetes came to put an end to the Christian movement in his province. He confronted Andrew and told him to abandon the superstitions about Jesus which Rome had abolished and that he never teach those things again or else face crucifixion. To this Andrew replied, verse, I would not preach the honor and glory of the cross if I feared the death of the cross. With these words Saint Andrew sealed his fate. He was condemned by the proconsul. Upon seeing the cross Saint Andrew said, verse, O cross, he declared, O cross most welcome and long anticipated. I come to you with a willing mind, with joy and desire. Since I am a follower and a student of the one who died on you, I have always loved you and sought to embrace you. Then Roman soldiers beat Andrew, then tied him to a X-shaped cross where he survived for 4 whole days preaching with a smile to a crowd of almost 20,000. Then he died and his body was taken by Stratocles and Maximilla, a leading woman in Acre, who prepared Andrew's body with spices and placed it in her own tomb. Today the relics of Saint Andrew, including his skull, are in the Church of Saint Andrew, Patras, Greece, along with the pieces of the cross on which he was crucified. This is a very important site for the Greek Orthodox believers whose faith is fruit of the life of Saint Andrew. 101 The place of the martyrdom of the Apostle Thomas, Saint Thomas Mount, Chennai, India. The Apostle Thomas, also called Didymus, was famous among the apostles because he would not believe in the resurrection of Jesus without touching Jesus' side and hands. After seeing Jesus, he gave a declaration of the deity of Jesus by saying, "My Lord and my God." After traveling for years, possibly bringing the gospel to the Parthians, according to Origen, he came to India in 52 AD and landed at the port of Musaeus, modern-day North Paravur, Kerala, India, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Thomas spent 10 years in Kerala state, establishing 7 churches, then went to Mylapore in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. According to the Acts of Saint Thomas, the kingdom of Mazdai, in the southern India, was ruled by King Misdaius. The king was infuriated when Saint Thomas converted his wife, Queen Tertia, son Jusans, sister-in-law and her friend Marcia. King Misdaius led Saint Thomas outside the city and ordered 4 soldiers to take him to the nearby hill, where the soldiers speared Saint Thomas and killed him in 72 AD. Altogether his mission to India lasted 20 years and many people were brought to Christ. 102 The tomb of the Apostle Thomas, Mylapore, Chennai, India. The Apostle Thomas, also called Didymus, the twin, founded 7.5 churches in Kerala, a state on the west coast of India. He was killed by order of King Misdaius and his body was buried in Chennai in the 1st century in the place where the St. Thomas Cathedral Basilica stands today. In the 10th century AD, a group of Christians from Persia founded the village of St. Thomas and built a church around the site of his grave. However, the structure fell into disrepair in the 14th to 15th centuries. Then in 1522 Portuguese Christians moved the apostles' remains to a new tomb and church in the same general area. Now the Sanctum Church is a basilica and is a place of pilgrimage for many Indian Christians. 103 The place of the martyrdom and burial of the Apostle Thaddeus, Saint Thaddeus Monastery, Karakalisa, Iran. The Apostle Lebbeus Thaddeus was a disciple who is also identified as Jude by many traditions. According to Armenian tradition, the apostles Thaddeus and Bartholomew came to Armenia in 45 AD to bring the gospel to its people in present-day Iran. The ancient Christian historian Moses of Khorene recounts that Thaddeus converted King Abgar V of Edessa. After his death, the Armenian kingdom was split into 2 parts. His son Ananan crowned himself in Edessa, while his nephew Sanatruk ruled in Armenia. About AD 66, Ananan gave the order to kill Saint Thaddeus in Edessa by club. The king's daughter Sandokt, who had converted to Christianity, was also martyred with Thaddeus. The place of martyrdom and burial is at Karakalisa, Iran. Later a church was built near his grave which many say is the oldest lasting church structure in the world. The present structure dates from the early 19th century, around a 13th century building, and that was built upon an older structure going back to the 1st century. Thousands of Christians gather annually near the church to worship and remember the life of Saint Thaddeus or Jude, the patron saint of Iran and the Armenians. He is also known as the patron saint of lost causes. 104 The place of the martyrdom of the Apostle Simon the Zealot, Saint Simon the Canaanite Monastery, New Athos, Abkhazia, Georgia. Simon the Zealot was a disciple of Jesus Christ who was either zealous for God with a strong fervor or could have been part of a group called the Canaim who were zealous for the law of Moses. There is not much else written about Simon the Zealot in the New Testament, except in John 14 verse 22 where he said The Fox's Book of Martyrs from the 16th century maintains that Simon preached the gospel in Mauritania, Africa and Britain, possibly Glastonbury, and holds that Simon was martyred in Britain, possibly in Caister, Lincolnshire, England. Ethiopian Christians believe that he was crucified in Samaria. Justus Lipsius in the 16th century AD claimed that he was sawn in half longitudinally in Suania, Persia. However, The oldest account is from Moses of Chorn in the 5th century AD, wrote that he was stoned to death at Wariasphera in Caucasian Iberia at the Church of New Athos in Georgia. The site of his martyrdom by Orthodox tradition was the Sergiu River near St. Simon the Canaanite church. Next to the river are stones with red coloration where legend has it that Simon the Canaanite's blood became infused in the rocks. Pilgrims come and often take stones at the site for blessing and are baptized in the river. Saint Simon is buried within the monastery of Saint Simon the Canaanite in New Athos, Abkhazia, Georgia. Relics of Saint Simon are also found in St. Peter's Basilica, Rome. 105 The burial place of the Apostle Simon the Zealot. Saint Simon the Canaanite Church, New Athos, Abkhazia, Georgia. The site of the martyrdom of Saint Simon the Canaanite by Orthodox tradition was the Sergiu River near Saint Simon the Canaanite church. Next to the river are stones with red coloration where legend has it that Simon the Canaanite's blood became infused in the rocks. Pilgrims come and often take stones at the site for blessing and are baptized in the river. Saint Simon is buried within the monastery of Saint Simon the Canaanite in New Athos, Abkhazia, Georgia. Relics of Saint Simon are also found in St. Peter's Basilica, Rome. Christians in Georgia are fruit of the life and death of the Apostle Simon the Canaanite.